So in this video, I'm going to go over the science shown in episode 2 of Netflix's BIOHACKERS TV show. If you haven't seen my video reviewing the science of the first episode, definitely check that out as well. But for now, let's just jump into it. First up, we have the Scuba Pills scene where Mia finds Ole timing how long he can hold his breath in the bathtub. It's really difficult to know if this one is possible or not, since we don't know what is in the pills shown here. I wouldn't be surprised if this was based on real science. There are definitely drugs that can improve blood oxygenation, since that is one of the best known methods of doping in athletic competition. The main issue I have with this is that we see later in the episode that the main characters imply the pills are meant to work instantly. Most of the comparable doping drugs work by increasing the red blood count, which takes time on the order of days or weeks. On the plus side, at least Jasper and Niklas are skeptical about the whole thing, and the pills seem to be shown to not actually work in the end. I think the more interesting phenomenon is something called liquid breathing, where you can breathe an oxygen-rich liquid like perfluorocarbons. They have some cool examples of rat experiments where it looks like the animals are underwater, but they're breathing normally. That's definitely not what's being shown here, but I just thought I'd add that as an interesting extra. Second, we have the class lecture scene where Lorenz gives a speech on her expectations of the first-year students. This isn't really a science point, but I think it is a bit of a misrepresentation of the academic experience. I don't think first-year college students should really be expected to be coming up with new methods. That's really what you're expected to do in graduate school. And even then, you do a lot of copying what other people have done before. Like with most things, first you have to learn by copying. Once you have some baseline understanding, then you can experiment and change your method. And while it is probably true that the date something was published does matter for specific techniques, or if you're building on and developing new methods, for these first-year students, a lot of the fundamentals haven't changed too much. DNA is still DNA, proteins are still proteins, and if the professor didn't want them to learn from a 3-year-old book, why did she assign it to them in the first place? That's just my opinion, at least. Third, we have the genome sequencing scenes where Mia assists with a genetic fertility study, and later when we see the sequencing results of Mia herself. Yes, you can determine sex from a genomic analysis. I'm not sure how impressive that is, since most of the time you can tell just from physical characteristics. Yes, you can determine ancestry to some extent from genetics. Companies like 23andMe or Ancestry DNA are examples that can let you do this yourself. Finding diseases current and future with a genetic test is true too, but only as long as the diseases have a genetic link in some way. Even then, a lot of the time it only tells you an increased or decreased probability of getting a specific disease, and is not necessarily a certainty in many cases. And yes, you can probably get a very approximate expected time of death from genetic tests as well. That's typically done by estimating biological age from DNA methylation markers. It's often referred to as the Horvath clock. That's technically epigenetics and not classical genetics though, and there's still quite a bit of debate about how accurate this epigenetic age measurement is. Yes, there is a freckle gene, and yes, we also know the gene variants for eye color and hair color. Lastly, we have the drug implant scene where Ole attempts to perform surgery on himself to implant a device under his skin to deliver THC directly. I haven't read any news articles with examples of this exact thing happening, but there doesn't seem to be any reason it couldn't be possible. There are examples of people implanting electronics under their skin similar to this, though. Dangerous Things is a company that sells kits you can implant like this, and this is probably better known as grinding, with a focus on augmenting the human body, kind of like cyborgs, compared to biohacking, which doesn't have to involve self-experimentation. Grinding is a specific subset of biohacking. In conclusion, I think the errors in this episode were less obvious than in the first episode. The genome sequencing and surgery scenes were all fairly realistic. Even what I'm calling the Scuba Pills was vague enough that it's hard to make any real conclusions. Actually, the science lecture scene was the one that stuck out to me the most, and that was based on my personal opinion. And if you like these videos, stay tuned for the review of episode 3 coming soon.